Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, January 1st, 2025. I had to just make sure I got it right and do it slowly. And we're live, too. We're doing a New Year's show. I don't know why. I could be sleeping in, I guess. It's not like I was out wildly partying last night or anything like that. But, I don't know, it was an opportunity. But it was also an opportunity to get back on the air and share some more stories with you. And it's an important news day. Things are happening. We didn't get a chance to talk to Greg on Monday. I don't know. I mean, I assume we'll get a chance to talk to him today, but I don't know. We have no hard and fast plans. But, it's New Year's. He may be sleeping in as well. But if you're awake and you'd like to ring in, happy to have you. We have plenty of stories to go over. Plenty of things to catch up on. It is 2025. Let's see. New year. Almost the end of the old Congress. They haven't actually, I don't think, done their adjournment sine die just yet. And in fact, the Democratic whip's regular email is in my inbox, and I guess I should take a look at, here we go. On Friday, the 118th Congress will meet at 11 a.m. for legislative business, they say, but also, I think that's just boilerplate, but to adjourn sine die. Then at noon on Friday, the 119th Congress will convene for the first time. And then I guess we'll get our first look at what the hell's going to happen with the speakership contest. I have also my inbox is stuffed with all sorts of headlines hawking themselves, and one of the groupings is about what will happen what you're supposed to watch with the speaker election, and that's something to keep an eye on because, of course, they have somehow the Republicans have the advantage of just like 1/3 of a member of Congress or something. That's all they can afford to lose. Of course, it's going to be extremely narrow. The majority, such as it is as narrow as it could possibly be. Usually they stick together on this one vote, but Republicans like to tear themselves into pieces and threaten their speaker from time to time because they're weird and they're lunatics. And let's see. Well, I don't know. I had planned to go elsewhere with the opening of the show, but maybe note to self, we'll try and remember to come back to the speakership conference or contest and note the top headlines of the morning, I guess. There's chaos. There's chaos everywhere. It is, of course, New Year's Day, and we have, football and parades to look forward to, I suppose, although now everybody's going to be on edge at the parades. Last night, we're under the cloud of a mass killing event, this time another truck ramming, a pickup truck, but it also included shooting as well, just because why not throw that in there? And it's been very weird and interesting to watch people watch the reporting about it unfold on Twitter or, now Blue Sky. I'm used to saying Twitter all the time, but no, nobody's watching. I'm not watching it anyway on Twitter. Blue Sky is sufficient for this one. New Orleans was the scene of the attack, and interesting also to watch the mayor of New Orleans call it what it very clearly is, a terrorist attack. The FBI, of course, insisting we're not using that term, which I guess is still interpreted as meaning we don't think the person who did it was Muslim, and so therefore it's not terrorism, even though the right-wing terrorism thing is kind of staring you in the face. But, of course, the FBI is probably also staring Kash Patel in the face, or at least the upcoming Trump administration. And in that administration, presumably agents, even the agents in charge, will be fired or at least reprimanded for calling any right-wing domestic terrorism. They're clearly not going to be able to do that. So I guess they're getting ready, although it's kind of always been their practice to do things this way. And of course, there's also a little bit, like if you think that there's just residual responsibility still coursing through the veins of the FBI agents, they too might not want to get out ahead of themselves. It could just be motivated by that. But As I understand it, I think we're now at 10 people killed in this attack, and 9 of whom, if I understand things correctly, and I don't because it's still sort of a breaking story, but in the early morning hours, Bourbon Street still crowded, of course, New Year's Eve going on, and that's always going to bring out the crowds. Bourbon Street probably always kind of crowded no matter what the hour of the day. That's sort of their thing. And also lots of people in town for the Sugar Bowl, one of the big football games. I was just curious and interested to watch. In the print news about the event, that everybody made sure to say, well, it's the Allstate Sugar Bowl. Like, do you have to really say that even in the news? You have to say it maybe on TV when you're announcing the thing. That's the sponsorship. But I don't think the news is under any obligation to tell you who's sponsoring the Sugar Bowl. But I don't know. It's become habit now. And at any rate, a person, and it was hard to even figure out that a person did it from some of the original headlines, or a vehicle actually did it. A vehicle rammed into the crowd, killing either 9 or 10 people. I'm not certain whether the 10th person is the attacker, who apparently also jumped out of the truck after running over as many people as possible and injuring some 30 others as well. Then hopped out of the car and brandished an assault rifle and began shooting and exchanged fire with police. At least one report that I've seen says that the attacker was in fact shot and killed by police. I sort of hesitate on that one because CNN apparently discussing it this morning, according to those who were watching, saying that the panelists were unsure what had happened to the attacker at all. They had there was no reports about it. Some discussion that he might still be at large. And, maybe the police would get around to interrogating him and arresting and interrogating him at some point. But apparently, ABC News reporting that the perpetrator has been shot and killed on the scene. And some places, some news outlets don't count the attacker among the dead, and others just count bodies, and it doesn't matter one way or the other to them. And all right, well, there we have it. That's going on. There's all sorts of other weird stories. Someone was pushed in front of a subway train in New York, I think, overnight as well. That not the rising to the level of this thing in New Orleans. I hope that just sort of randomly happens from time to time in New York, though you sometimes find out some weird motivations behind it as well. United States military striking at Houthi targets in Yemen after the launch of more missiles, and an attack on American shipping as well. So just a little bit of chaos everywhere today. And wow, I mean, there are so many threads that we could pursue in all of this. I'm not even certain which one to go with first. I guess for the moment, simply because we just don't know that much more than what I said about what happened in New Orleans, and you're likely, if it's a story that compels you to look into it, you've probably already heard the story, and I can offer no analysis of that one, except to note with some interest that the FBI, as usual, is hesitant to call it terrorism, and we'll see whether that develops into a more pernicious habit, I guess, during the upcoming Trump administration. So let's see. I mentioned that there were other threads to look at. There are many. New Orleans. We could stay in New Orleans. I just thought this was an interesting thing that I've seen shared on social media quite a lot in the last day or two, from Essence magazine, which we only occasionally hear from. I don't think we've I don't know, have we ever read Essence magazine entry other than I recall Darwin's mention of the festival, but I don't know if we've ever read from the magazine. Anyway, regardless, we're doing it now because I don't know, they seem to be the only one on this story that that I've seen so far, and it's quite a weird one. Louisiana's governor-elect, who was referred to this morning as governor. Do they inaugurate their governors on New Year's Day or something like that? I don't know. What's the current status? Well, we'll find out, because this was an article from when? How long ago? November. Oh, okay. I see what we're talking about. This is from November of 2023. Wow. Interesting. I'd like to know what the shakeout on this is, because, hello, this has been some time. I assume that this is still ongoing and why it's being shared. And now, of course, the governor-elect from 2023 would be the governor, and then that's it, right? No mystery there any longer. He was inaugurated some time ago. Louisiana's governor-elect wants to withhold funds for New Orleans's decaying water infrastructure until women who seek abortions are prosecuted. What? That doesn't make any particular sense. I don't see the connective tissue there. But just another sort of MAGA Republican weirdo insisting on, one, enforcing his view on abortion on everyone. Louisiana apparently has got that law and has the ability, and I guess has been threatening, to prosecute women who seek abortions. But in New Orleans, the local DAs have, I guess, assured everybody, look, we're not going to be pressing charges on things like this. So, Jeff Landry, is that right? Is that the name of the governor down there in Louisiana? I would look, I went to look at the picture's caption to make sure I got the name right, and they use such light type, I could barely read it. At any rate, what a connection this guy has made. So I won't send the funds for you to repair and maintain your drinking water system. And apparently they're having a tremendous problem. It's not surprising in a major urban area, but they're drawing their drinking water, as I understand it, from the Mississippi River, and so needs a bit of treatment, I guess, before it's potable. And they also have had the problem of seawater encroaching into the river, and it, of course, affects their abilities to convert it into potable water. And apparently that's something that happens every once in a while that has, of late, been happening more and more. And perhaps there's a climate change connection to that one, which, of course, the governor will deny. But in the meantime, yeah, he's angry that the local DAs won't enforce the law about seeking prosecution for women who seek abortions. And so why the hell should anybody in, New Orleans, fairly major town, as I understand it, have any potable drinking water? Not until he gets his way politically. That is unusual. Let's say Gabrielle Perry, by the way, the reporter in Essence who reported way back in November of 2023, just to give you some of the factual background here. In September, the city of New Orleans and some of the surrounding parishes in South Louisiana began to prepare for at least 3 months of saltwater intrusion in the local water supply. President Joe Biden then declared a crisis, federal emergency, declared the crisis a federal emergency, and authorized funding for FEMA and other state agencies to mitigate the burgeoning crisis. While months of extreme record-high heat and lack of rainfall in and around the Crescent City are responsible for the crisis. Okay. Definitely a climate connection there then, or at least one alleged. Some are pointing at current Louisiana Attorney General and Louisiana Governor-elect Jeff Landry, now the governor, of course, as partially responsible for the city's ability to address the now circumvented crisis, as well as the decayed state of the city's entire water infrastructure. Landry personally solicited the Louisiana State Bond Commission last year, and remember that would be 2022, I guess, to withhold millions in funding from the New Orleans Sewage and Water Board due to the city government's refusal to arrest and prosecute women in the wake of Louisiana's total ban on abortion. The New Orleans Sewage and Water Board remains in desperate need of funding to tackle necessary repairs to its 4 water intake structures, one of which has been inoperable for 34 years. I would say they really have 3 water intake structures at this point. Despite a race against time to keep salt water from encroaching from the Gulf of Mexico, there has been no concerted efforts by the state to improve its most populated city's water infrastructure. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and New Orleans Homeland Security spent weeks unloading daily shipments of 36 million gallons of fresh water into the Mississippi in an attempt to dilute the river enough to prevent any further progression of the salt water or the growing concern of the intrusion of lead into the city's water supply. Both Jefferson Parish and Orleans Parish are in the process of building 2 respective pipelines to avoid both saltwater and lead contamination in their drinking water. This ordeal unfolding during the Louisiana gubernatorial election way back when, 2-3 years ago, coupled with the ascent of 2 Louisiana conservative GOP extremists, wow, I can't believe it, to the highest offices in the land, has sparked conversations and frustration about the fate of a city caught in the crosshairs. Mike Johnson, I guess, at least one of them. So 2 Louisiana conservative GOP extremists, the highest offices in the land. Okay. Well, Mike Johnson, Louisiana. Who else are we talking about? I'm not even sure. At any rate, with reproductive justice and environmental justice acutely intersecting, black families, remember we're reading Essence here, black families are especially vulnerable. In an email to Matt McBride, a reporter from the Louisiana Illuminator, that was later published, a spokesperson for the New Orleans Sewage and Water Board, Grace Birch, said, "We're at a critical point with nearly $1 billion in capital improvements projects slated for the next 5 years that are 93% funded," Birch said. "We have scoured every source of city, state, and federal funding, but our customers must know that these are one-time sources that are not sustainable, and we're looking at long-term plans for capital projects, especially as it relates to water treatment and distribution." As of October 2023, the state of Louisiana had a budget surplus of $330 million. And yet, I guess still no help from Landry. He apparently just doesn't care. I don't know. There's a little bit more to it here. But it is rather a long read. And I guess what ought to be doing is finding out where they stand on these repairs at this point. And why was it? It was interesting that it was getting such tremendous play on social media over the past couple of days. And yeah, I sometimes wonder about that. Now I want to go back and see if we can find out why it is that that's being circulated now. I think I first noticed it here from Brandon Friedman, who was circulating a screen cap of this story, although I think if I open it up, there's no date line on this thing. Although is this an updated Louisiana's governor-elect? Yeah, so that's still from 2023. And an interesting point Brandon was making: when a government withholds clean drinking water from a portion of the population, that's state violence. That's an interesting way of looking at it. It's the same as when health insurance companies withhold treatment to make more money. That is also violence, and we need to frame these actions in that context more often. Well, that is something to think about as well. But yeah, how it came to be circulated again, though it's a 2023 story. And I don't imagine things got any better as between New Orleans and Jeff Landry in the time since then. But I don't know. I was a New Orleans connection that had happened across my screen just the other day. And, I enjoy doing things that way. This reminds me of, and, things I've been sitting on and saving that I wanted to spit out. Okay, let's see. I also had mentioned, the new Congress coming into town and convening on the 3rd, which is Friday. And I noticed that if I can find it here, in my email this morning was the Hill's, promotional things, promoting this bit on 5 Johnson holdouts to watch. That's a weird phrase. You don't want to be holding out Johnsons at first thing in the morning, but apparently that's what they're doing. What's going on here? Well, of course, it's the re-election of Speaker Mike Johnson, one of the aforementioned Louisiana GOP conservatives who had risen to the highest offices in the land. Let's find out what is going on and which 5 we're supposed to watch. Although sometimes, sometimes the hype in the newsletters that end up in the inboxes is a little overblown. But let's find out. What do they have to say? What do the holdouts want, and who can sway them? That's the first question. Oh, do I need to... By the way, if I want to link to this, How can I do it? Since this is sitting in my email, I'll have to find a way. But I'll share the word with you here. What do the holdouts want, and who can sway them, or what can sway them? Speaker Mike Johnson's fate rests with a handful of House Republicans who, despite a clear endorsement from Trump, I guess he's finally come out and given him his endorsement, but he was very late in coming with it, too, and it had people wondering whether he even would offer him his backing. But, I expected that someone, probably Susie Wiles, would be advising him that now's the time to sort of try and put on the mantle of party leadership here and back him. And, with Trump, he'll throw the backing that's necessary that people won't, so that people won't, party activists won't complain that he's not backing up the speaker. And if Johnson loses, he'll just say, I never liked Mike Johnson anyways. He's a huge loser. But they do seem to have something of a relationship, I guess. He was toting him around and taking Johnson with him to the UFC fight a couple of months ago, right after the election. So he's kind of been a Trump hanger-on of late. All right, let me see what we got here. But let me interrupt the flow just for a second for a little bit of the coffee that was still left when I had to rush to the microphone. Oh, please. Okay. Much easier to do when you got somebody else doing some of the talking at the moment. All right. So Speaker Mike Johnson's fate rests with a handful of House Republicans who, despite a clear endorsement from President-elect Trump, are opposing or withholding support for the Louisiana Republican ahead of the Speaker election on the House floor on Friday. Those who remember the drawn-out Speaker's election 2 years ago, and a lot of us will remember things from 2 years ago. That's a wide swath of our audience. Very few toddlers listening to the program. But those who remember the drawn-out election 2 years ago may be feeling deja vu, although you've never really left that land of confusion. It took 15 rounds of voting over 4 days to elect former Speaker Kevin McCarthy in January of 2023. But unlike that saga, which came after months of calls from the House Freedom Caucus for structural changes and other commitments from McCarthy, there's a lack of specific demands from the holdouts this time. What are their demands? Greg would demand to know. Most of these holdouts are seeking a clear plan from Johnson. A plan for what? I don't know. Many have felt burned by how he handled numerous major bills over the last year. And I guess the plan is, how can we return to conservative governance where we pass things with Republican votes only, if necessary, and not have to make concessions to Democrats? And the answer is win more elections. But you haven't done that, so there's not much that they can do. It's also tougher math for Johnson, who can afford only one Republican defection in the razor-thin majority, assuming all members are present and voting for a candidate. They offer more details on speaker math at a link here, but I think we have grasped that. Johnson said on Fox News' Hannity program, on Monday, that he has been in contact with the holdouts. The quote here, "We're in constant conversation about all of this. I think that those members and all of them, want to be a part of these solutions. They made big promises to their constituents in this campaign cycle, and we got to deliver upon them," Johnson said. Now it's the media and the left that wants to divide us and distract us. We can't fall into that trap. I'll admit this much. Sure, the left would love to divide and distract you. It's just, one, it's not necessary for us to do anything about it. And two, you can't blame 5 Republican holdouts who say they're not going to vote for you for speaker on the left. They are actually on the right. They're also, you can't blame the media. They're not members of the media. It's just pure deflection. In the lead up to the speaker election, here are the 5 holdouts to watch. Oh, I guess before I jump in on it, I'll just point that out again. This is something that I see Oliver Willis and a couple of others harping on all the time. And that is the habitual, it's a bit of an eye roller from Johnson, right? We all know he's just lying or just, at least BSing here. But it's a good reminder that this is sort of the default position of Republican politicians at this level is it doesn't matter to them in the least whether it's believable, whether it's a groaner, an eye roller, whether anybody is swayed by it. It's just standard issue rhetoric. You know, what are we talking about here? Republicans and whether or not they will vote for him for speaker. Democrats aren't going to vote for him for speaker. That's not their job. And it's the job of the Republican conference to elect their speaker if they're the majority. They didn't win enough elections to have a clear majority, and they can't do it. But what does Johnson tell the press? And what do they print dutifully? He did say it. It's the left and the media causing all of this. And Oliver Willis and others are saying, you know, we really do have to have a plan going forward where Democrats just need to be out there saying things, even if they are eye rollers and they're a little stupid and everybody agrees that they're BS. I mean, we got plenty of that anyway. Most people roll their eyes at everything Democrats say and say it's BS anyhow. It might as well be to our distinct political advantage, the messaging, if people will, you know, absorb it and print it. Why? You know, but they do this. I mean, that's the media training for Mike Johnson. What are you going to do about the fact that Republicans won't vote for you? Well, let me tell you something. This is the left screwing with us. You know, it's not that we were just asked, why won't Republicans vote for you? Why don't you have confidence that Republicans will all vote for you on the first ballot? The answer, the media, the left. It has nothing whatsoever to do with it. But there it is. In print, nonetheless. Okay, time now for our first break coming up, and therefore the music announcing that break. We'll read about the first holdout, and I guess you would have been able to, if I asked you to name them, could you name all five? I don't know if I could, but certainly the first one off the top of my head, Chip Roy. He's number one here. Roy was a key figure in negotiating agreements that eventually resulted in McCarthy's election last time, such as increasing representation of hardline conservative members, like himself, in key committee posts and lowering the threshold to force a vote to oust the speaker. Let's tell you more after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Not much in the way of updates that I was able to find in the 2-minute break on the situation with the water in New Orleans, although it does look like it's something, I don't know whether he's still holding it hostage or what, but plenty of negative reaction to the story that Essence was covering around the time, a little bit afterwards, after their coverage, and then some further mention of it, but I haven't seen anything that is a good quick hit that tells me what the resolution, if any, to the problem is. But, well, now I'm curious to see what we can find out in the future. In the meantime, Justice updates me that the FBI's statement, most recent statement, tells us that they are, in fact, adopting the framing of this act as an act of terrorism, or at least investigating it. And he sends me this one here, that Scott McFarlane is reporting that the FBI statement mentions the word, at least this morning, an individual drove a car, at least this time there was an actual individual behind the wheel, drove a car into a crowd of people on Bourbon Street in New Orleans, killing a number of people and injuring dozens of others. The subject then engaged with local law enforcement and is now deceased. That's about as sterile a accounting of it as you can get. The FBI, though, is the lead investigative agency, and we are working with our partners to investigate this as an act of terrorism. They have not reached that conclusion, and that's fine. That's at least, responsible police work. But it's good to know that at least for the next 3 weeks, they're open to that possibility. after which I assume they'll begin to get orders not to investigate it as terrorism if it involves a certain type of person. Perhaps a type of person who might get a pardon for doing it later on, if you know what I mean. But, so I would say at this point, very little chance of that happening now. I mean, Trump, if there's anything actually conservative about him, it is that I think he knows that an act like this, an immediate pardon, even if the person says, President Trump told me to do it, unless they're running over the political enemies of Trump himself, after he calls for it, unlikely to be pardoned in this instance. At least not now. All right. At any rate, I'm glad to see. Thank you also for the sharp eye out from Justice. Shouldn't you be back? You're up too early. Thank you, though, for giving us the word that at least they're accepting that framing. I was a little bit worried about. I didn't really suspect that they were capitulating to what might become the Kash Patel, Donald Trump, Elon Musk demands later on. I wasn't so concerned that they were, complying preemptively, or what is the phrasing? I forget. But I was a little more worried that they were just sort of taking it too slow. And again, everything with a grain of salt, but it's like habitual with them. Again, that too, I guess, harkens back to the things that Oliver Willis was harping on, right? It's harmful. We don't really want to encourage or mimic Republicans in the way that they immediately jump to conclusions ordinarily. I don't know. Maybe they were still asleep because it's New Year's Day, but I didn't, and maybe because I'm not engaged in Twitter these days, I didn't see the immediate rush by conservatives to come out based on nothing and say, oh yeah, this is a Muslim terrorist. We got to stop this. And we have to close the borders and end all immigration, et cetera, even though, they know very well that it's very likely that it'll turn out to be a domestic actor and very likely a white person as well, but and a self-professed Christian very often. But that's sort of the standard response. Not something that we really want to cultivate necessarily on this side, but that there is a standard response is something to note. Even in the much more traditional arena of electing a speaker in the Congress, they have stock phrases that they'll go to that, even when there's really no call for it at all, and certainly no basis for it, just launch an attack on Democrats on your way to whatever it is you were going to say, right? Do you want fries with that, sir? Democrats and the lunatic left are preventing me from, saving America, and yes, I'd like fries with that. What was the point of that first phrase, sir? Nothing. I just, it's a verbal tick I have. I attack Democrats before I answer any question. But, it might be worth exploring, particularly if you actually have a message you'd like to get across. So where were we? We were talking about the 5 holdouts identified by The Hill or who have at least not committed to voting for Johnson for speaker, at least not in the first round. And very frequently, I think with these types of people, they very often just like to threaten things and see if they can get some concessions, and then they fall into line eventually, even if they won't do it on the first ballot. Some more so than others. Chip Roy has been pretty consistent as a holdout. And he's also gotten a great deal out of the negotiations. He's been able to leverage a lot of power for himself, and I assume that he's continuing to do it for that reason, if no other reason. Thomas Massie, who's next on the list and whose name you might also have guessed was going to be on the list, he's been relatively consistent just in terms of he just can't be relied upon, but it's not clear that his demands in these cases have been consistent across the board. And I think he's a little buggy, that's all. Anyway, what does Chip Roy have to say? As we mentioned earlier, Roy was a key figure in negotiating agreements that eventually resulted in McCarthy's election, right? He eventually came around to agreeing to vote for McCarthy and endorsing him and throwing his votes behind him on the 15th ballot or whatever in exchange for various concessions, including putting him on the Rules Committee, which was a huge break with precedent. And the reason it was precedent is because the Rules Committee is usually the Speaker's mechanism by which they control the House and control what legislation comes to the floor and in what form it comes to the floor. And he traded that power away for the gavel, but he didn't realize, I guess, that the gavel was powerful because it meant control of the Rules Committee. And if you give away control of the Rules Committee, you're just a guy with a big wooden hammer and nothing much more. You can control who gets to use what rooms in the Capitol complex, and there's more. There's still a lot of power that goes with it. But the legislative one and the policy setting one was surrendered to Chip Roy the first time. Now, it goes on describing Chip Roy's situation that this time around, it's not clear what specific commitments Johnson could make to appease Roy, leaving him in place at the minimum. The Texas congressman voiced frustrations about how Johnson had handled numerous issues over the last year in a Fox Business interview on Tuesday, such as frustrations about spending that the House approved that was not accompanied by spending cuts, the pay-fors, I guess, and that the House's 72-hour rule to review legislation before passage was repeatedly circumvented. We need to have a plan before January 3rd. It's still before January 3rd, so it's time for a plan. The Speaker needs to speak to it if he wants to have all of our support, Roy said. And, that's not particularly specific. I'll speak to it. I intend to, what was it I needed to do? Oh, yeah, give you 72 hours to review everything. Standard pronouncement at the outset of a new Congress. We're definitely going to do this time around. We're definitely going back to regular order. Everybody knows that the Speaker candidate says that, and then circumstances demand that they not do that later on, but they're already Speaker. So nothing new so far. Thomas Massie is up next. Massie is the only lawmaker so far to say that he will vote for a candidate other than Johnson. And he has signaled that Trump's endorsement is not swaying his position. On Tuesday, he said, and that's a good point and it's worth mentioning. But I mean, I guess if you can only afford to lose one, did they say that he can afford to lose one, but no more than one? Can only afford one Republican defection. And my guess is it'll be Massie, at least on the first ballot. Whether anybody else goes with him, probably depends on whether or not they think they can leverage something out of Johnson in exchange for coming around either right away or on subsequent ballots. But Massie, I guess, isn't going to be there and may not be persuadable, but maybe on the 15th ballot or something like that. Anyway, Massie's the only one who said he'll vote for someone other than Johnson. Trump's endorsement isn't changing his mind so far. On Tuesday, he said that Republicans will lose the House in 2026. Good. If Johnson remains Speaker, dismissing arguments that Republicans could not find a viable alternative in a timely manner. He was only electable the first time, this quote from Massie says, because he hadn't held any type of leadership position, nor had he ever fought for anything. So no one disliked him. And everyone was tired of voting. This is a pretty good explanation of it, actually. He won by being the least objectionable candidate, and he no longer possesses that title, Massie wrote in a post on Twitter/X, or Exeter, as Marcy Wheeler calls it sometimes. Keep watch, though, on whether Massie softens his position on Johnson at all. Oh, boy. He could register his displeasure without doing more to threaten Johnson's gavel if he votes present rather than for another candidate, right? That probably comes from the explanation of the Speaker math in all this, and maybe we'll go back and review that after we get the names on the record. Next up, oh yes, right. Maybe you remember that Victoria Spartz has been making noises out there various sorts of noises. And some of them, I guess, are Ukrainian sounding because she is a Ukrainian-born congresswoman. Have we mentioned that? I think it has been mentioned in passing, but I keep forgetting it. The Ukrainian-born congresswoman is a major wild card in the speaker vote, given her history of odd positions and flip-flopping that keeps members guessing. Earlier this month, it seems like she's taking the Nancy Mace card here on this one. And I wonder if Mace is on this list. Earlier this month, Spartz declared that she would not sit on House committees or participate in House GOP conferences. I will not be involved in circuses, Spartz said in a statement, because she would rather focus on helping who? Her constituents? No. Helping the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. Maybe she'd rather work there. She should resign. She has called on Johnson to make public commitments on spending issues, such as creating an, quote, emergency fiscal working group, okay, and a plan to deliver on Trump's agenda beyond what Johnson has already outlined publicly. Johnson spoke with Spartz for about 45 minutes on Monday. He said in his Fox News interview, "We'll have a meeting with him. We had discussions, but I don't trust that he's going to do it, so I think he publicly needs to say what he's going to do," Spartz said on Bannon's War Room on Tuesday. So she's a wild card, but she's a lunatic MAGA wild card, and I guess is going to be towing the MAGA line, I guess, on everything but Ukraine, maybe? I do think she's pro-Ukraine and all of this, but remember, of course, you can be Ukrainian-born and still be pro-Russian, because there are such people, and plenty of them. The Russians made sure to cede all of eastern Ukraine with Russian-born, Russian ethnics years ago, while Ukraine was a Soviet republic. Anyway, I don't know exactly what her background of her family is there, but I think she's been one of the Republicans who are not on board with the pro-Russian position in all of this. That's my recollection anyway. But as for the rest of this stuff, I'm going to be a thorn in Johnson's side. Oh, good. Oh, yeah, but not from the left, from the right. Trouble for Johnson is a good thing, but okay. Who else is on the list? I guess we round out the list of 5. No Nancy Mace. We have the Andy caucus, apparently. Andy Harris of Maryland and Andy Biggs of Arizona are numbers 4 and 5 here. Harris, the newly re-elected chair of the House Freedom Caucus, had a key role in negotiating an internal House GOP deal to raise the threshold to trigger the motion to vacate the speakership to 9 members, helping Johnson get unanimously renominated as Speaker in November. And even as Johnson was facing backlash on an initial short-term funding bill, Harris said he still supported Johnson. But that changed a few days later when Harris said he was undecided on what leadership should look like in the 119th Congress, citing concerns about new spending not offset by cuts. How Harris handles the speaker vote will set the tone for his leadership of the Freedom Caucus over the next year. And I think that's what the hesitancy is about. The House Freedom Caucus membership said, what the hell, Harris? Maybe you shouldn't be the chair of the House Freedom Caucus if you're not speaking up about the need to, what they might say, hold Speaker Johnson accountable, i.e. get more concessions out of him for the House Freedom Caucus. Having you knuckle under and appear to be pro-Johnson doesn't help the House Freedom Caucus with its work. So he said, all right, well, what if I reverse myself and say, I said the other day that I still support Johnson, but now I'm going to do some saber rattling on behalf of the caucus. Not particularly convincing. Andy Biggs, the other member of the Andy caucus, I guess there are probably others, but these are the 2 nudniks we hear about all the time. Biggs has the same spending and process gripes with Johnson that many of his Freedom Caucus colleagues like Harris and Roy have. Here's a quote from him. "There are some issues that I think need to be worked out, specifically dealing with budget issues," Biggs said on Fox News shortly after Trump endorsed Johnson on Monday. But Biggs has historically taken a more aggressive stance in key speakership matters than Roy and Harris. He voted present on the 15th speaker ballot in January of 2023 that handed McCarthy the gavel, and he was one of 8 Republicans who ousted McCarthy 9 months later. So he's been a bit of a wild card all along, the weirder of the two Andys, I guess. And I guess he, along with Massey, could cause problems. If I guess all it takes is the two of them to do something weird to block Johnson on the first ballot. And that also, by the way, you should be on the lookout for it. The House Freedom Caucus and others just interested in proving that they can still make it difficult. He may very well be elected on the second ballot. And it may very well be an understood thing that they may be telling him, look, my position in the House, my constituency, my Freedom Caucus proclivities demand that we send a signal. And we're going to send that signal on the first ballot. You're not going to make it on the first ballot. Just hold the second ballot, because I'll switch my vote for the second ballot or the third or the fifth, whatever it is. Not much real reason to hold out for the fifth if you are indicating that you'll eventually switch. You might as well just do it on the second. So, I don't know. I guess my prediction would be a symbolic failure on the first ballot, followed by some huddling, some talking so that it looks like something changed, and then a second ballot, and then a victory then. I guess if we have to make predictions, I might as well make that one. It's the time for making bad predictions. I have a full year to confess to it, apparently. That, too, a big topic of discussion over the last couple of days, given the change over in the calendar. Semaphore, I guess, put together a collection of, I don't know what exactly. Some pundits and some other just, I don't know, rich and important people. I don't know exactly on what basis they were doing it. What I mean is, anyway, they were asking people what were the things that you were wrong about, like, or what prediction perhaps were you the most wrong about in 2024. It's meant to be a moment for the punditry, I guess, to admit their errors, but some of them use it realistically, and some of them don't. And some of them, though, on this list weren't pundits per se. They were just, I don't know what. Like, for instance, the one that struck me, can I still find this thing? I mean, it was kind of crappy, actually. And there were definitely people who either didn't understand the assignment or, in fact, did understand the assignment and just were going to ignore it anyway. Let's see. I think David Roberts was the one who I saw who circulated this and was complaining about it yesterday, and with good reason. Let's see. Where would that be? I don't think I have to go too far to find it. Yeah, here we are. So Roberts, David Roberts from Volts magazine. Anyway, he had this to say about it. This laughably hollow simulacrum. What's the word? I never say it out loud. Is simulacrum? Oh, I don't even know. But I know the word. It's just not the pronunciation, but okay. Got to put a $10 word in there and screw me up today, huh? Anyway, this laughably hollow compilation, let's say, of journalistic accountability, and that's in scare quotes, accountability, is a perfectly fitting capper to 2024. Honest to God, nauseating. Well, I wasn't nauseated by absolutely everything in it, but like I said, there were some people who took the assignment semi-seriously. And then there were others who, one, I'm not even certain why they were on the list at all. Like they're corporate figures, not pundits. So I was a little confused about their inclusion at all. And so among the people who took the assignment maybe more seriously, although they definitely used it, to get a punch or two in. And that's, I guess, to be expected. And it was also a little bit of a misuse of the platform. Like, for instance, Steve Bannon is in here. One quick hit, like what we got wrong. The first one up, in fact, is Andrew Ross Sorkin from Squawk Box on CNBC saying Doge and the pairing of Elon and Vivek Vivek together was not on my bingo card for 24. So not an admission of being wrong on some prediction per se, but an admission of not seeing this thing coming. And okay, fine. I don't think, but I mean, kind of, it's true, but it was also carefully chosen. Like, hey, nobody saw this coming. Okay, fine. Then Steve Bannon makes an appearance, and he's clearly, on the pundit side of the ledger, that his prediction of, or rather the thing that he got most wrong, that Taylor Swift would make a bigger difference than she did with low propensity, low information voters. I guess he thought that might be the case. And he goes on to say, it was teed up, but she waved off. Contrary to early reporting by everyone from MSNBC to the Washington Post, there he's getting a dig in, the Swifties were washing their hair on November 5th. I guess that's his way of saying that it didn't show up in the numbers threatened and didn't sway the election as threatened. I don't know whether that is measurable. Swifties alone. I don't think there was a huge problem with missing voters from the youngest cohort, at least more so than usually is the case. But anyway, it was an interesting point, and at least it was sort of like, okay, there was a prediction made that the Swifties could weigh in, and I agreed with it. I thought it was a valid prediction, and it turned out not to be true, in my view. And you could argue about whether or not it was true, but there you have it. That's him using the assignment correctly. Then the very next entry is from Nicola Mendelsohn. Who's Nicola Mendelsohn? She's the head of, well, maybe I shouldn't even tell you. But name doesn't ring a bell. I'll just, it's dumb. You'll guess. She's the head of global business group at Meta, the Facebook company, right? Meta. So what's she even doing here? I don't know. But this is I don't understand the assignment / I'm going to abuse the assignment. This is definitely, Nicola strikes me, I guess, as she's the person still willing to say in an interview, not that she's had an interview for a job in a million years, I'm sure, when they ask you that trick question at HR, what would you say is your greatest weakness, right? And you're always, for years, you were coached to say, well, my greatest weakness is I'm a workaholic. I just can't stop thinking about the company and how I can do better for the company. And, this is supposed to be, you turn the weakness into a strength. I'm a workaholic. I can't stop doing for you. You see, well, everybody has been able to see, everybody knows that that's coached and that it's not, well, one, I'm not really interested in workaholic people in general, but I like your dedication to work and stuff. But, anyway, let's not pretend that's a weakness, et cetera, et cetera. It's very corny at this point. And here, she does the same thing with this question, really. Well, again, remember, what were you most wrong about in 2024? And this is the quote. This whole category of AI glasses. Now, if I had stopped there, I would say, yeah, you were totally wrong about that. You guys said AI glasses was going to be a thing, and it's not a thing. But she says this whole category of AI glasses has taken off a lot faster than we expected. If you had asked us earlier, we would have said you'd need to wait for full holographic AR glasses in order for them to become a mainstream product. But with the impressive advances in AI, our Ray-Ban Meta glasses ended up being a bigger hit sooner than we expected. This is, your greatest weakness being a workaholic. What did you get most wrong in 2024? The thing I got most wrong was wildly underestimating how amazingly fantastic our new product would be and how many people would love them like you've never seen before. It's a very Trumpian thing, for one thing, to trumpet this, this product. Like this whole category of AI glasses, that's the big mistake. But what she's actually saying is the mistake is I didn't know and you don't know how popular these things are. I mean, maybe I'm missing something. I know 0 people who have ever even mentioned, I might like to try the AI glasses. I mean, isn't that Google Glass? And they had it and it was dumb and nobody liked it and you looked stupid. So they stopped doing it. It might be a different product. Okay. AI glasses, a heads up display of your computer wherever you go. Kind of interesting in a science fiction-y way. But I've never heard anybody say that. What do you want for Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, solstice, I don't know, Thor's Day, whatever. I've never had anybody say, even computer-focused kids never said, yeah, AI glasses, meta glasses. Sure, absolutely. Maybe you have. Maybe you've got a pair. I don't know. But this sounds to me like workaholism being your greatest weakness. What I got wrong was how awesome I am. The company is. Anyway, I just found that really irritating. Rachel Maddow is next in the list, just to give you an idea once again of somebody, saying something decent and smart. You can usually count on her for that. And 2, taking the assignment seriously. Right. All the liberals, well, not all the liberals, but liberal pundits take the job seriously. We were asked a question, and it wasn't me, but I don't know why I make it me, and they answer. But Republican pundits say the thing I got most wrong is, first of all, Democrats are terrible. Second of all, something I didn't really get wrong that wasn't really me. It was somebody else making the mistake. I believed them when they said they were going to do something, and I'm so dumb because they're terrible. Why did I believe them? Rachel Maddow says, I thought people would be more unnerved by J.D. Vance. All right, that's legit, and she did get that wrong. I mean, it wasn't her fault or anything, but I thought people would be more unnerved by J.D. Vance. Less the cat lady thing and more the Americans are going to have to get over their dictator phobia Mencius Moldbug thing. Throwing in a Curtis Yarvin mention there, too. So maybe she's doing a good job, like punditry-wise, saying, I'll get the dig in as well. She does take a hit at Curtis Yarvin, so I guess you could view things that way. I just happen to agree with it, so maybe it doesn't strike me the same way. But at least she's answering the question. What did you get wrong? I got wrong. I thought people would be more upset about J.D. Vance, and then he disappeared instead. Anyway, I just thought that whole article was an interesting concept, but just didn't have the stomach to read all the way through it. I don't know. Something struck me about Nicola Mendelssohn's answer, though, that I wanted to share. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see what other things do we have to check out here. Well, let's see. Can't remember what the connective tissue might have been between looking at the punditry and everything else that was going on. But okay, I guess we were reading. Let's see the predictions or the 5 people to watch on the list for the speakership race, and probably a couple of other things I wanted to check in on in email. But let's see. I don't know. We'll see what else we've got parked away here. Oh, and I now realize I had a couple of emails from many of you out there in listener land. That is everything outside of this house. At any rate, I guess counts as listener land. And let's see if I don't know how quickly I can bring them up to the screen here, but I think we're caught up on David Paquette's updates for us on the differences between the 2 canals that we've been talking about in the last couple of days. Let's see, the Suez Canal thing, right? We updated, right? No locks because it crosses no elevated land. So entirely at sea level from end to end. It's just one big long ditch and is filled from the Mediterranean at the northern end and from the Red Sea to the south. They just let the seawater flow in and everything's just fine. Let's see, any other, there's a couple other discussions, a little bit of discussion of alternatives to crossing the Central American, is it an isthmus? Is that right? I don't know. That word comes to mind for this, that were considered back in the day. But I think we're up to date on the canal reports. Although I also see now parked in my inbox here is way behind on the input from Jeremy Freiberger, who also chimed in, I guess, on the seafaring thread that's, I guess, run through our show. How about that? I didn't realize that we had a whole seafaring theme going on, but I guess between the canals and the Baltic situation, we in fact do, and Jeremy had something to say about that regarding the severed Baltic Sea underwater cables. I might have some insight to add. Let's find out. We'll put him on the spot. And let's just assume that there is insight here. Jeremy's usually insightful. As I've mentioned before, I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota. The western, you might say, well, okay, seafaring. What are you talking about? How is Minnesota related to that? Well, hold on a second. There is something here. It's a good geography lesson. Duluth, Minnesota is the western terminus of the St. Lawrence Seaway. That's right. I might not have thought, in fact, I didn't know that, but I certainly wasn't thinking about, well, shouldn't all this discussion of these passages bring us to some thought about the St. Lawrence Seaway? No. If things are going well, you're never thinking about the St. Lawrence Seaway. Just like with most things. Everything's working just fine. You don't need to worry about it. But now that we're going to invade Canada, it's a big deal. Thus, although Duluth is nearly 1,000 miles from any ocean coast, my birthplace is nonetheless a very busy seaport. As such, Duluthians, oh boy, Duluthians generally know more about shipping than the average Joe. Okay, we'll say this. It's not hard these days to know more about shipping than the average Joe, but okay, credit where credit is due. And because my dad's business was loading and unloading not just Great Lakes freighters, but also saltwater bulk carriers, I know a few things. Well, good. It's always helpful to know a few things, and even better when you tell them to us. Plus, I did summer work on the docks during high school and college, which pretty much makes me an expert, and certainly compared to me. Foremost, ships generally anchor in harbors, rivers, or otherwise close to ports where water depth is relatively shallow. They rarely drop anchor over hundreds of feet of water. In other words, if someone forgot to raise anchor when leaving an anchorage for open water, they'd be trolling less than 200 feet, whereby the anchor would mostly be suspended some distance well above the ocean floor. Yeah, you don't have enough can't anchor in the middle of the ocean, I guess. Dragging the length of anchor chain necessary to reach bottom out in the middle of the Baltic Sea shipping lanes wouldn't be an absent-minded mistake. It definitely wasn't. But we did learn a little bit about the depth. I saw in passing that the Baltic just, I guess, pretty much everywhere is just not particularly deep, which I guess is what makes it such a good candidate for traversing the space between upper Scandinavia and northern Europe with all these cables and pipelines. I guess it's easy to work on the sea bottom there because it's not particularly deep. Anyway, this was, in fact, likely an intentional act of war committed by Russia, by the Cook Islands somehow, against a group of other nations. Okay. I think that the Estonians and Finns are likely reaching that conclusion, and the Germans are with them. So it seems like it'll all be borne out, but at least it makes a little bit more sense of the situation. So thank you for chiming in. By the way, while I'm out there in Userland, I guess first day of the year is a good time to catch up on thanking a couple of, one new sponsor, Norma Zuckerman, who is a new to our Patreon gang of sponsors that keep the program going, and two who have been with us for a while and have, relatively of late, boosted their contributions to us. Caduceus S is our first name to offer that boost thanks to, and Val Jostock, the second. This all happened early in December 5th and 7th for the three of you. Thanks very much for joining in, for staying on board, for boosting your contribution. It's going to be, we're looking forward to the Trump second term with some trepidation. And it's going to be fairly important that we, I guess, keep each other on an even keel, to do another seafaring reference, for as long as we're permitted anyway. Hopefully things never get, dangerous at this point to even, go on the air and make mention. I mean, I guess they've got that capacity. We're kind of low down on the ladder in terms of people that they're going to need to identify for rounding up, for at least for this show. There may be other reasons that they need to round us up, but all right, I don't know. I was just putting that out there. But to the extent that we can keep each other company during this and keep each other sane and remind one another that, through the magic of podcasting and live streaming, that there are other people out there, even if they're not near you, even if they are, in Idaho or visiting back in Duluth, Minnesota or whatever, that we can stay connected and remind each other that we exist and we're not all taking crazy pills after all. Okay, let's see. Got to get back to a couple of other topics here. And maybe time to head back to Pocket and see what else I had put aside to share with you on a probably what would otherwise be a relatively slow day, but for the craziness in New Orleans. Let's see. Oh, yes. I mentioned the other day, now that Trump has raced to the Supreme Court to try to intervene in the TikTok case. We were reading the rather complex Steve Vladeck discussion of the weirdness of the brief that was filed there on behalf of the Trump, I don't know what. It's not the Trump administration per se, because they're not in, but nonetheless filed by, what's his name, who is John Sauer, who's slated to be Solicitor General in the next Trump term. And the knock on it, I mean, it was got to be a very weedy explanation of why everything is so weird in this brief. But the short-ish answer to it is that, one, they're not intervening on behalf of either party in this suit. And two, that they are not asking for any sort of relief that the court is permitted to grant. They're asking for a stay on the effective implementation of the new law that would, unless the ownership of TikTok is transferred to a non-Chinese entity, and I don't know whether it demands that it be a U.S. entity or not. That I'm not that familiar with the legislation, but by January 19th, then the sale would be forced. And Trump is asking for a delay in that ban being implemented in either the forced sale or banning the use of TikTok inside the United States pending such a transfer by January 19th. And he's asking for the court to just say, we're not going to require that the law be enforced. Not that we're going to enjoin it from happening because we've made a finding of unconstitutionality, but that he's just saying, just make it so that the law isn't effective until I become president. And that's just not a thing. You can't do it. You can try to block the implementation of the law based on, like I said, the argument that it's unconstitutional, but the brief makes no such argument either. They're just saying Donald Trump wants to be known as the guy who saved TikTok. And in order to do that, we need you to just have the deadline of January 19th not be there. Can't you just order that? And it's amazing. It's not surprising that Donald Trump would think, why don't they just rule that? Because he thinks the Supreme Court is magic and they can rule whatever they want. And to some extent, they kind of can. Like, it's judicial canon that Steve Vladeck is explaining to us that, well, you can't just stay a law. You can ask for an injunction against the law for a reason. You can't just say, I want that to not take place. That's not something we do. There's no mechanism for that. Well, couldn't you rule that there is? I guess you could, but it would be pretty seriously destabilizing. I still think, even though they're willing to they're willing to invoke magic for Trump and Republicans, whenever they're asked, really. Here, I guess, I don't know. It's like asking them, can you rule that a ruling isn't necessary? Or something like that, right? You know, can you just invent a new tool to help me get what I want? Well, couldn't you could probably hammer it into shape in a way that would allow us to make it look like we're still ruling as a court. Couldn't you do that? And apparently they can't. What's amazing is that John Sauer also isn't doing it. And I guess this is what is so worrisome to Vladeck and others about this, is that it foreshadows that the Solicitor General in the Trump administration will literally do anything he's asked by Trump. It doesn't matter whether it has no basis in legal practice at all. I will still put that down in a brief and sign it. So that's kind of worrisome and dangerous for those who think, well, you know, technically, if they wanted to, the Supreme Court could rule, you know, just about anything and say, we don't have to offer an explanation. This is exactly what we've been telling you. They've been threatening for a long time. Yes, but, you know, it would be a lot easier if the Solicitor General also teed it up that way, right? But no Solicitor General worth their salt, anyway, would ever do such a thing. And now, well, we're finding out that it's not the case that, yes, they will. John Sauer will do it. We're just finding out that John Sauer's not worth its salt, I guess. But we'll still be Solicitor General nonetheless, because no one has any plans to say we can't confirm him as Solicitor General because he's been roofing people at Republican women's conferences and raping them, for instance. And even if we did have that information, I am not sure that that would stop him. So, I think, let's see, which part of it did we read? Because there was another, we read through the section on the brief's law and authority free ask. But again, like we said, we got a little weedy, that it went into the differences between a stay and an injunction, and that they were asking for the wrong kind of relief, essentially. But like I said, it did get a little bit weedy, but it's worth noting. That's something I think you can carry away with you, is they're just asking, not only is it unclear what they're asking for, but they're definitely not asking for the right thing here. And it matters that you get the terminology right, right? These are the people who say you can't talk about guns if you said clip, for instance. Anyway, but we didn't get to this part here, which has to do, with the unitary executive theory, just to harken back to something we discussed a lot in the olden days and wrote a lot about during the George W. Bush administration, which, again, the election of a Democratic administration, the Obama administration, made the issue go away and disappear for those 8 years. And then, of course, it comes roaring back with Trump entering into office. This section here, the not so unitary executive. Not so unitary? What do you mean? Tell us, Steve Vladeck. The other significant argument that this brief attempts to develop is the claim that the TikTok statute interferes with Article 2 in various respects, especially because of its timing. Quoting from the brief, the statutory deadline for divestment falls on the day before President Trump's inauguration. Yes, raising concerns that the act effectively forestalls the incoming administration's ability to address the question. Interesting. And then there's a little bit of a typo. They left out the word "the" here, but at the very least, the timing raises yet another significant question under Article 2. What is this question that they're talking about? To be clear, there's nothing outwardly problematic about Amici, the friend of the court brief here, about this brief raising Article 2 objections not raised by the current president, I guess whose prerogative it really is to raise these issues, but okay, fine. They raise Article 2 objections that the current president did not. Indeed, it's easy to think of reasons, both in this case and others, why a president might soft pedal Article 2 objections to a statute that he'd rather prefer to see upheld. And it's both settled and, in my view, correct that Article 2 objections don't go away just because the current president isn't making them, although that's usually the view of the Office of Legal Counsel, for what that's worth. The issue is the extent to which Article 2 objections here are tied to things that will happen before Trump is sworn in. There is no tradition in the court's case law or elsewhere of Article 2 giving privileges or powers to a president-elect. Indeed, the court's systematic embrace of the theory of a unitary executive is flatly incompatible with the idea that Article 2 would simultaneously protect two different presidents' interests. Right? So it is interesting here what Trump is doing on two levels. One, we want you to stay this law so that Donald Trump can be the hero of TikTok. Well, not only should that not be a consideration for anybody, but it's hypocritical anyway, because Donald Trump was the original proponent of the TikTok ban to begin with. And I was wondering, how come we're not talking about that a lot? And I found that there is a Daily Kos entry on that subject that we can share with you. But in the meantime, there's also Steve Vladek's objection here, which is a slightly different one, which is, well, one, if the Supreme Court believes in the unitary executive, well, then it's unitary. The job of objecting or enforcing this law falls to Joe Biden and no one else, at least until January 20th. And if the deadline is, the deadline was clearly chosen for this reason, that it should fall to Joe Biden and to no one else. But how amazing will it be for the biggest proponents of the unitary executive? I mean, after January 20th, Donald Trump will say, when I'm president, nobody else can speak to Article 2 but me. I'm a unitary executive. But while Joe Biden is president, I can also speak to Article 2 because I'm going to be president later on. And really, honestly, no one can predict that I'm not going to be president in perpetuity. So shouldn't I be able to comment on it forever? What happened to the unitary executive, man? Well, when it's unnecessary or inconvenient, it goes away. And of course, there's, that then just brings us back to where we were a minute ago. There's no legal reason or logical reason anywhere of any kind why the court should intervene to allow Donald Trump to handle this thing, which he's not president for, just by saying, well, why can't you just make it wait until I am president? Because that's not the way calendars work. Right.
That is not how this works!
Okay. Now, Justice Kagan, that is really unnecessary. You can just write it down. You don't have to scream at him. Although I understand your frustration. So where were we? Right. Look, the court's systematic embrace of the unitary executive theory is flatly incompatible with the idea that there isn't a unitary executive. After all, it can be bifurcated as between people who are president and people who just aren't, even though you expect that they will be the next day. All of this follows, or should follow, from the fairly unobjectionable fact that until noon on January 20th, President-elect Trump is not the president, and thus has no Article 2 prerogatives to infringe. If President Biden, the current holder of the office, wanted to utilize the statute's 90-day extension provision, nothing is preventing him from doing so. The fact that he doesn't want to, or that Congress wrote the statute in a way that leaves it up to him, can't possibly infringe on the prerogative of someone who isn't yet the president and won't be when the relevant clock runs out. Although that's a good reminder, I guess, if Joe Biden actually thinks it's a good idea to stop this process, I don't know what he thinks he can get out of being the savior of TikTok at this point since he's leaving office, so maybe forget about it. But I don't know. If he thinks it's important to his legacy, the mechanism exists. He can say on January 19th or any time before then, you know what? We're going to extend things 90 days and give the new president a chance to look at things. And I don't know. At this point, I don't know what the advantage of doing that would be, because surely if he were to say, let's extend things 90 days, Joe Biden is the savior of TikTok. Donald Trump, first thing, well, maybe not first thing, because he's got a whole list of things he's going to do first thing. And that, too, is incompatible. But okay. The moment he gets a chance to get around to it, Donald Trump will just say, I actually saved TikTok, not Joe Biden. He was trying to get rid of TikTok. I'm the hero here. And it would probably work among his crowd. And it would work probably even beyond his crowd because everybody, is sort of attuned to finding or framing stuff that happens in late January as being due to the incoming administration. Anyway, if President Biden wanted to do it, he could. Thus, the more that the court is inclined to embrace arguments that Article 2 also protects the prerogatives of the president-elect, the more it is turning its own embrace of the unitary executive on its head. And the more that President-elect Trump is making these arguments himself, the more he's revealing that his goal isn't the strongest arguments in support of the institution of the presidency, but rather whichever arguments get him what he wants in that particular moment. Again, that's a remarkable message to send in a brief, the entire premise of which is that it's on behalf of the person who is about to become the president. It is pretty remarkable. And again, for that reason, remarkable that John Sauer would sign the thing and submit it. Next up, the tone and tenor. Finally, and relatedly, although it's by far the least important feature of this brief, it is impossible to miss its obsequious ring-kissing tone. Not just the fact that it is saying that the incoming Solicitor General will do whatever Trump wants and whatever Trump asks. He will do it willingly and slavishly, which is kind of weird. This, of course, has been pointed out by lots of folks online, such as Harvard Law professor Jack Goldsmith. That's especially significant because the brief was filed by D. John Sauer. Dean, D there. I thought he was the dean of a law school somewhere, but that's just his name, and he hates it. So D. John Sauer, President Trump's intended nominee to become Solicitor General, i.e., the government's representative before the Supreme Court. I've written before in some detail, Steve Vladeck says, about the significance of the federal government's institutional credibility before the Supreme Court, including, if not especially, in circumstances in which the Justice Department is arguing for a position not necessarily supported by a majority of the justices. It's bad enough that Trump's amicus brief is asking the court to act lawlessly without providing any authority for it to do so. But if we're in for this kind of ego-stroking, navel-gazing writing in the government's briefs going forward, that will have significant, and in my view, significantly deleterious long-term implications for the government's relationship with the court, including in innumerable contexts in which that relationship is worth preserving. All in all, not a terribly auspicious start for the incoming Solicitor General and President-elect. I don't doubt that the brief will come up during the oral argument on January 10th, but I'd be rather floored if a majority of the court were to rely upon it. Okay, so that actually sums it up here, but if you didn't hear the beginning of our reading of this, or you don't remember exactly what they're talking about in terms of the ring-kissing aspect of this, I think it's up at the top here. He kind of gives you a sample of it, but let's see, where is the this discussion? But I don't know if I can find it all that quickly. But what matters is that this the brief goes out of its way to say, not only do we want this illegal thing, we want the law stayed rather than enjoined until President Trump can come into office. It goes out of its way to say, well, the reason we want that to happen is because President Trump himself, remember he's not president, but yeah, he still gets the honorific title, I guess, from his first term. But that President Trump is uniquely skilled at deal making. And so America would be deprived of his unique deal-making prowess if we don't just do this thing that there is no mechanism for and allow him to fix it, because only he is capable of doing it. It's like it actually goes full Trumpian in the brief, and it's worrisome to see the person who's supposed to be among the most serious lawyers in the country pollute briefs to the Supreme Court this way. And doesn't augur well. to say the least. All right, so now we've gotten through that. Time now for our second break. Oh no, I'm a second late. Well, we'll just we may just have to let that stand. It is, after all, New Year's Day, and we don't want to make the rest of the staff work too hard in editing this stuff. We got one more segment to share. I don't know, various esoteric groupings of stories. But we can get back. Maybe we'll go through the thread here and go back to the Daily Kos writing about what happened with this whole flip-flop on TikTok. After all, maybe this will be a good explainer. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Are we getting all the yogurt out in that one? Okay. Everyone should be aware. How do we do on that? Pretty good, right? Okay. Yogurt it's French yogurt, so it's being retrieved from a glass container. So we got a little ding, ding, ding. So good. I like the diner ambiance that we can produce from time to time on a holiday here on the show. All right. What about news? Shoot, I remember. There was something I wanted to tell you. Ah, yes, right. Here's the piece by Alex Samuels at the Daily Kos front page, reminding us that Trump did once try to ban TikTok. Why has he changed his tune? And the answer is, I don't know, there's some advantage to it. Of course, I think going into the election and through, I don't know, I guess the end of Trump's first term, TikTok was kind of emerging as a new social media force. And I think probably while Trump was still president, TikTok was generally anti-Trump in its leanings. And I don't mean from an official standpoint or even whether or not it was being driven by the Chinese government or not. but rather it was the chief use of TikTok that was making news during Trump's first administration was that the K-pop kids were using it to make fun of Trump or foul his message or foil his plans in some way. And so he came to hate TikTok for that reason. And so, sure, let's ban TikTok because it's getting in my way politically. Now, as it happens, by the end of the campaign for his second administration in the 2024 election, TikTok was being used by Republican influencers to spread misinformation and combat real information wherever possible. And so it ended up that, I guess, Republicans decided that they were making enough use of the TikTok platform for their own purposes that they were now against the ban. That's my recollection of the way things unfolded. Let's see whether Alex has information that either confirms that or is contrary to it. President-elect Donald Trump urged the U.S. Supreme Court on Friday to pause implementation, just pause it, of a law that would ban TikTok in the United States effective January 19th. The law will ban the app unless it's sold by its Chinese parent company, ByteDance. So, okay, I think we remembered it correctly. Trump wants to delay the ban, at least until he assumes office on January 20th, which also happens to be Martin Luther King Day, so he can use his alleged consummate deal-making expertise, that was the language John Sauer included in the brief, to address ongoing national security concerns with the Chinese platform. President Trump takes no position on the underlying merits of this dispute. We're just here for no reason. John Sauer, Trump's lawyer and pick for U.S. Solicitor General, wrote in a 25-page filing, instead, he respectfully requests that the court consider staying the act's deadline for a divestment of January 19th, 2025, while it considers the merits of this case, thus permitting President Trump's incoming administration the opportunity to pursue a political resolution of the questions at issue in this case. In light of these interests, including, most importantly, his overarching responsibility for the United States' national security, as if he was taking that seriously, and foreign policy, that too, President Trump opposes banning TikTok in the United States at this juncture and seeks the ability to resolve the issue at hand through political means once he takes office, Sauer said. I mean, I think it should be pretty plainly obvious whether or not Trump has really changed his view of TikTok because of its political power or the way his party's been using it. I don't know, but it's a good guess. But another good guess, of course, is does he want to be the savior of TikTok or does he want to be paid to be the savior of TikTok? And isn't that perhaps part of what's going on here? If you enforce this law as of January 19th, as it's written, Donald Trump misses out on the opportunity to say, nice platform you've got here, China. Be a shame if something were to happen to it, and something can happen to it. It was out of my control originally, but it's been put in my control illegally by the Supreme Court at my request. Now, is there something that you have in your hand, which if it was in my hand, might make me forget about TikTok, for instance? And I don't mean beautiful chocolate cake. I've already got the world's most beautiful chocolate cake. You remember that very well. I served it to you at the beautiful Mar-a-Lago sex dungeon that I conned you idiots into visiting last time around. Anyway, that's probably what's driving it. Notably, Trump's lawyers attempted to play up his influence on social media, claiming that Trump is, quote, one of the most powerful, prolific, and influential users of social media in history. I mean, he's supposed to be influential in history. He's the president of the United States. Again, unfortunately. You could just lean on that, but they got to puff up his social media profile as well. I got to have more followers. Trump is powerful, indeed, but influential is more of a head-scratcher. If anything, Trump used social media as a bully pulpit, once again, wrong usage, I think, and to block users who dared to disagree with him. Friday's filing comes ahead of the January 10th oral arguments on whether the law violates the First Amendment by unlawfully restricting speech. The bill garnered bipartisan support and was signed into law by President Joe Biden in April, although it's been challenged by TikTok, and you should expect that. And they have a good question here, I guess. And, depending on how you may feel about whether or not the First Amendment applies in the same way as it does to, say, news media, or whether it applies at all, I don't know. But, Trump, of course, says, I have no opinion about that. I just want to be able to solicit a bribe. Can you arrange for that for me? Earlier this month, a panel of federal judges unanimously upheld the law, leading TikTok to appeal the case to the Supreme Court. Though Sauer told the High Court that Trump has no position on the legal arguments being made for or against the law, the brief referred to the First Amendment implications as sweeping and troubling. So he does have a position. Trump's lawyer also warned about setting a dangerous global precedent toward government censorship, which, remember, I thought Elon Musk was kind of against. It's not immediately clear why Trump, who attempted to ban the app in 2020, and it is linked here in case you were wondering where that comes from, is suddenly desperate to save it after his initial efforts failed in the courts. While running for a second term, Trump vowed to save TikTok, but notably left out specifics on how he'd do that. TikTok boasts more than 170 million users in the United States. In what is likely just a coincidence, Trump's change of heart comes as TikTok's CEO, Shu Zi Chu. I'm sorry. If I'm getting anywhere close to the correct pronunciation of that, but that's my best interpretation of the anglicization here. I'm not reading the Chinese characters, I assure you of that. Shu Zi Chu becomes the latest tech billionaire to kiss the ring. CBS News reported that he met with Trump at his Pervalago estate earlier this month. We'll take a look at TikTok. You know, I have a warm spot in my heart for TikTok because I won youth. I won youth by 34 points. What? Trump said at a December news conference when asked about the ban, and there are those that say that TikTok has something to do with that. Of course, Trump's former statement is not true. While the president-elect did make inroads with young voters compared to past Republican presidential candidates, exit polls show that he still lost voters between the ages of 18 and 29 to Vice President Kamala Harris. But of course, his view of it is, I won by 34 points. No, you lost. I don't know how much you lost by, but it doesn't matter. You didn't win by 34 points. But I like that. I won youth. I won it. Now, it's something shocking, somewhat shocking then, that Trump's lawyers are making the false argument that the man who can't even successfully negotiate deals with Congress somehow possesses the ability to hammer out a resolution to save TikTok. That's actually a decent point. I think maybe, though, the more salient point here is making the argument that the man who can't even successfully remember that he actually lost the youth vote, and probably fairly convincingly, did not, in fact, win it by 34 points. How you could think that somebody who could get the basic facts so wrong could negotiate anything, I have no idea. But remember, the job is, apparently now, the job of the Solicitor General of the United States is going to be flatter the president. Although that's not entirely out of keeping with the job. Usually, they're usually working in concert with OLC, and OLC, while not out to flatter the president personally, is of course out at all opportunities to expand and protect presidential power. Anyway, Trump is, in actuality, one of the worst presidential deal makers in modern history. So why should he be trusted now? So no real answer, I guess, as to why he has changed his tune, except his own answer, which is, I won youth by 34 points, and youth loves the TikToks, as I understand it. And so if they love it, I love it, because we're good friends, because I won them. You know, it's interesting. I mean, I guess that's a way to, would that work with everybody? I don't know. It's kind of unique circumstances. This is really more about being oppositional and defiant of anything Biden wants to do. And of course, wanting to set up the situation where, you know, so that he can get a bribe from somebody, I guess the new CEO of TikTok, in order to quote unquote save it. But Oh, I mean, is that something you can do? Like, ordinarily, you'd be like, the youth, they were against me, so I'm against them. So we're going to make a new law where I can arrest them all. But instead, they told him, well, you won by 34 points. I did? Okay, well, then I love the youth. What are the youth like? TikTok? Okay, well, then we'll save TikTok. The youth have nothing to do with it, of course. It's, again, I have to imagine it's just a bribe thing. So what about the earlier anti-TikTok position that he had? It refers back to an NBC News piece from July 31st, 2020. Kevin Collier, Josh Lederman, and Joe Ling Kent reporting Trump says he's banning TikTok in the U.S. It came from him. We're banning them from the United States. Trump said Friday, way back in 2020, aboard Air Force One. I mean, that makes it pretty clear. We're banning them from the United States. And right away, I mean, it was unclear at the time what the basis would be. And now they've gotten around to it, of course. President Biden carried through with this for whatever reason. I'm not entirely clear on really what was motivating it. But he said, all right, well, if we want to have a ban, you do it legislatively. Congress, will you? Congress said yes. He signed it. That's how it's done. Now, Trump in 2020 said, I'm going to do it. It's just going to be my orders. And guess what? It didn't work. It took, work to get this done, whether or not it was worth doing. Anyway, back in 2020, the story was President Donald Trump said that Friday night that he would ban the popular video sharing app TikTok. As far as TikTok is concerned, we're banning them from the United States. Trump said aboard Air Force One as he returned to Washington after a fundraising trip to Florida. Trump described the action as severance. In what sense? And said he could sign an order as soon as Saturday. Well, I have that authority, he said. Now, did he sign the order? I don't know whether he signed anything or not. He loves signing stuff. Did he have the authority? Apparently not, because it took 4 more years to get around to it. And then once the ban was set to be implemented, but by someone else, he wanted to block it. Now I love TikToks. So did he have the authority? I can do it with an executive order or that. What is that? Referring to emergency economic powers. A spokesperson for TikTok said in a statement that the app is a job creator committed to the privacy of its 100 million users in the United States. Blah, blah, blah. Who cares? We've hired nearly 1,000 people to our U.S. team this year alone and are proud to be hiring another 10,000 employees into great paying jobs across the U.S. And everybody loves our glasses, apparently. Like in Semaphore. I don't know. He doesn't say that, but okay. Puffery, whatever. Did they hire that many people? I don't know. Are the jobs great? I don't know. But that's the sort of thing that spokespeople say. Our $1 billion creator fund supports U.S. creators who are building livelihoods from our platform. Is it? I don't know. Can I get in on this? TikTok U.S. user data is stored in the U.S. with strict controls on employee access, the statement continued. I guess this is the fears that drove the Chinese ownership worries. TikTok's biggest investors come from the U.S. We are committed to protecting our users' privacy and safety as we continue working to bring joy to families and meaningful careers to those who create on our platform. I can't even believe that that's still... is that happening? It is. We're just not getting in on it. The American Civil Liberties Union tweeted that Trump's plan was, quote, a danger to free expression. The president said he didn't support a deal involving TikTok and Microsoft. Right. We got to, we're going to ban you unless you sell to non-Chinese owners. Well, who can buy something like TikTok? TikTok, these things, once they become popular, for some reason, they're valued at $1 trillion. Who has that money? Well, Bill Gates and Microsoft might. Yeah, but I don't want Bill Gates to have more money. He already has too much, i.e. more than me. And he's not using it the way I want. And he's not putting money into my reelection, even though I'm sure they're going to kick in $1 million for your inauguration. But that hadn't happened yet. The president, that was Trump, said he didn't want Microsoft buying it on Friday. So what? You don't want that. Well, I can block anything. On Friday, reports emerged that Microsoft was in talks to buy the app from its Chinese owner, ByteDance. A source familiar with the matter confirmed to NBC News that Microsoft was in, at least, talks to acquire TikTok. Don't know if they're still interested. This is, again, a report from 4 years ago. TikTok was, at that point, also in talks with several other companies for a possible sale, but Microsoft was the farthest along and most likely. At that stage, the deal might not be an outright sale, and ByteDance could instead sell a majority stake to an outside buyer and leaving it with a small stake. The source confirmed that TikTok had conversations with the White House, but would not confirm if they spoke on Friday. Microsoft declined to comment at that point. The White House, Trump's White House, had ramped up its concerns about the popular video sharing app in recent week over its ownership by ByteDance, a Chinese company. Chinese law can compel any domestic company to hand over data that it has collected on users. So that is a bit of a security hole there. We're looking at TikTok, Trump said earlier on that Friday. We may be banning TikTok. Isn't that something? It went from we may be banning to I am banning back to we may be. We may be doing some other things. He doesn't know any of what's going on. He just wants to shake them down. So he says the things that are supposed to be necessary to make normies in America who read these comments think TikTok is under threat. I don't know if it works with TikTok leadership the same way it does with normies, but there you go. We're looking at TikTok. We may be banning TikTok. We may be doing some other things. Trump told reporters at the White House Friday morning, we are looking at a lot of alternatives with respect to TikTok. Sounds like a 2-week situation, doesn't it? 4 years later, not only have we not gotten it done, but when somebody did, in fact, try to get it done and set a deadline of January 19th, Trump is now trying to stop it. While TikTok is largely seen as an app for young people, it tracks phone locations and users' metadata, like many apps, and China has a demonstrated appetite for Americans' personal data. TikTok has also faced repeated accusations of censoring content unappetizing to Beijing, prompting fears that the app's popularity serves as an extension of China's influence. Since November, and this is November 2020, or I guess probably November 2019 at this point, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which investigates foreign acquisitions of U.S. properties for potential national security threats, has been looking into ByteDance's 2017 acquisition of Musical.ly. I guess it's musical.ly, the Chinese-owned lip-syncing app that it merged with TikTok. I didn't really even register the existence of that one. Microsoft is in talks to purchase the app. The New York Times had reported. Microsoft declined comment. Earlier this month, Larry Kudlow, and this month again is July of 2020. So this is happening in 2019 and 2020. Lost our place here. Where's Larry Kudlow? Here we are. Earlier this month, Trump's top economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, said he had been informed the eventual buyer, quote, will be a 100% American company. Well, that didn't happen yet either. TikTok has repeatedly claimed to be an independent company, free of China's influence or demands for rights to domestic companies' data. But on Wednesday, Wang Wenbin, a spokesperson for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, indicated that China views TikTok as a domestic company. And that may be all that matters. The app is not available in mainland China. Trump and members of his administration have repeatedly said China should be punished for its role in allowing the coronavirus to spread in the U.S. Banning TikTok could be part of that retaliation. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said earlier this month. So that's another interesting out of left field connection. They love to do that and just leverage whatever government power they have for whatever reason they're actually mad about, just as we were just hearing was the case down in Louisiana. I'm mad about abortion, so you can't have help with your water system. That's just their MO. With respect to Chinese apps on people's cell phones, the United States will get this one right, Pompeo told Fox News earlier in July of 2020. TikTok declined to confirm a potential sale. While we do not comment on rumors or speculation, we are confident in the long-term success of TikTok. TikTok spokesperson Ashley Nash Han said, Hundreds of millions of people come to TikTok for entertainment and connection, including our community of creators and artists who are building livelihoods from the platform. And you really shouldn't be dependent on TikTok for that, but it's happening. In June, teens on TikTok claimed they had orchestrated a lower than expected turnout at Trump's Tulsa campaign rally. This is what I remember about him hating TikTok. After a viral effort to reserve tickets they had no intention of using in an attempt to humiliate the president with an empty arena. Trump was said to be, quote, furious at the, quote, underwhelming crowd, NBC reported. So that's my memory of him coming to hate TikTok, that the K-pop kids were doing something that bothered him. And so now I hate the TikTok. But now that fake news people, well, he wouldn't say, but what we call fake news people, were using it to assist him in his election, that could have something to do with his now being willing to save TikTok, but more likely in combination with the ability to extort payments from somebody so as not to target it for a ban. All right. I think that fills in the blanks, at least, about that one. Let's see. We got a couple of minutes left here to try and squeeze in another story or two here. Oh, well, maybe later in the week we can get to further explanations, more English language sources about what's going on in Korea. That might be helpful. Let's instead add a couple of other stories to the list here. First of all, maybe a fairly quick one. Down in Texas, an interesting developments in the courts there. Ken Paxton's deputy wins legal ethics lawsuit over 2020 election challenge. Actually kind of troublesome. From the Texas newsroom at KUT News. Written by Lauren McGaughy, or I'm not certain of pronunciation there, but McGaughy. McGaughy, I think. Might be my best stab at it anyway. That's what I'm going with. Here's the story. The Texas Supreme Court has sided with a top aide to Attorney General Ken Paxton in an ethics lawsuit over challenged false statements about Joe Biden's 2020 win. I guess I would say long story short on this one is this. Paxton, on behalf of Texas, supposedly, joined with other attorneys general around the country in filing baseless lawsuits about the supposed theft of the 2020 election. And the ethics boards there and the Bar Association in Texas pointing out, hey, what you've done here in filing this case is you made false statements and false accusations of theft of the election in your legal filings to the Supreme Court in the hopes that you would be able to reverse the outcome of the election. I understand what you were trying to do politically, but in order to get there, you had to make statements that you had good reason to know were probably, or in fact, were outright false. And some of them were very clearly false. And we can actually make a decent stab at proving that you knew that they were false. So shouldn't you be perhaps disbarred or brought up on ethics charges? Well, as it turns out, the Texas Supreme Court says, not so much. In a 7-2 decision on Tuesday, the Texas Supreme Court ruled that First Assistant Attorney General Brent Webster could not be disciplined for allegedly misleading the U.S. Supreme Court regarding the 2020 presidential elections. Maybe they figure no harm, no foul. The court didn't rule for Trump. But that shouldn't be the basis for this. Did you file this? Yes. You should not have? No. Then you should be in trouble. The decision is a huge win for Webster and Paxton, his boss, who were both sued and threatened with disbarment for violating the lawyer's code of conduct. Paxton's case is still pending. Paxton cheered the decision in a statement. And he put it this way: after 4 years of lawfare and political retaliation, oh no, not that, the Texas Supreme Court has ended this witch hunt against the leadership of my office, he wrote. We have seen this playbook used against President Trump and other effective fighters for the American people, and I'm pleased that this attempt to stop our work has been defeated. You mean suing you to stop you from, an insurrection? among other things, or lying about the outcome of the election and just hoping that a court would award it to you. Yeah, we were trying to stop that. That's not lawfare. That's enforcing the law. We count the votes, and the person with the most votes wins, and not the popular vote in the presidential election, but you don't understand, in each state. That's who gets the electoral college votes. And you guys were saying, no, we can forge those and win it for ourselves. Well, no, you can't. That's actually against the law. Well, it should be against the law for you to say it's against the law, says Paxton and his deputy. After the 2020 election, the state of Texas challenged Biden's win in several swing states, not even in Texas. They were suing about other states. The case was quickly thrown out, but it prompted a disciplinary commission of the State Bar of Texas to seek sanctions against Webster and Paxton over alleged false statements in their arguments. The state Supreme Court ruling hinged not on whether or not they were actually telling the truth, but on who can challenge legal arguments made in court by the Attorney General, who acts as the state's lawyer. What makes this case different from ordinary litigation is its constitutional dimension. Justice Evan Young wrote for the majority. He said, allowing the commission's lawsuit to continue would, quote, risk the politicization and thus the independence of the judiciary. Young added that the U.S. Supreme Court could have disciplined Paxton or Webster for their alleged false statements, but they did not. Justices Jeff Boyd and Deborah Lehrman dissented, saying the majority opinion reflected a disdain and distrust for the state bar's commission and its ability to discipline lawyers, which is kind of what they're there for. Luckily, they added, the decision applies just to this case. Unfortunately, it does not reduce the damage it causes to the separation of powers doctrine, Boyd wrote. A spokesperson for the State Bar of Texas declined to comment on the decision, and that's too bad. I'm sure there'll be some reaction to it in the near future. But yeah, that's pretty interesting. So now there's no ability. The State Bar Association can now no longer bring charges against members of the Attorney General's office if they lie in their briefings to the Supreme Court because something reasons. Applies only to this case. I guess so, but that's kind of what they said about Bush v. Gore, too, and that didn't work out. But, yeah, interesting. So they didn't come right out and say that the State Bar of Texas doesn't have, at least it's not in the report, that they just said that they don't have standing to sue, because really, who else has standing to bring a legal ethics case against somebody? I don't know it's just kind of bizarre and just sort of, well, let's just hand a victory to the Trump side and worry about the consistency of the reasoning later on if it should ever become, if there's ever any reason to think about logic and case law ever again, as opposed to simply granting the Trump administration whatever it is they're asking for, even if we don't actually have the power to do it. That's what they're trying with the TikTok case. It is interesting how all of this stuff meshes and comes together. Anyway, all right, time for us to sign off and hand things over to Justice Putnam for today's programming.
NetworksRadio.com.
And there is new programming in the offing.
You've been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Let's see what we can see. What's coming? Look, Jack Smith pulled a surprising move. I missed it. By transferring Trump's Mar-a-Lago espionage case to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Oh, good. Do stay tuned to get updated about that, and maybe we'll look into that tomorrow and Friday. Plus that and much more from around the country and around the world. Things we missed. Stay tuned for more.